Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Mason Hughes stood in front of his house, clutching a bouquet of flowers almost soaked with sweat. It was the anniversary of his 6-year marriage, and he wanted to surprise Emma. He turned the key gently, trying not to make a sound. The living room was silent, except for the regular ticking of the kitchen clock. Mason placed the flowers on the table in the foyer, took off his work boots, and headed toward the bedroom. The bedroom door was ajar. Mason was about to push it open when he heard Emma's voice from inside, the kind he hadn't heard in months, tinged with intimacy and softness. Then a man's whisper, followed by Emma's soft laugh. Mason's hand froze in midair, and his chest felt like it had been hit hard with a hammer. He retreated silently into the living room, picked up the forgotten bouquet of flowers, and walked out the door. Sitting in his car, Mason stared at the house they had purchased together, his fingers clenching the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had imagined their future in this house, the laughter of their children, the promise of growing old together. Now it all seemed like a cruel joke. Mason didn't confront Emma immediately. He started the car and drove to a bar on the outskirts of town that he and his best friend Leon frequented. The bar was smoky and the music was just loud enough to drown out the conversation. Leon was already sitting in a corner booth with 2 glasses of whiskey in front of him. "You look like you've been run over by a truck," Leon said, pushing one of the glasses toward Mason. "Bad marriage anniversary." Mason drained the whiskey in one gulp, the bottom of the glass hitting the tabletop hard. "She's sleeping with someone else, right here in our bed." Leon's expression went from flirtatious to serious. Leon Parker was a former police officer who now ran a private detective agency. He'd seen too many similar situations, but never thought it would happen to Mason. "Sure." Mason nodded and poured himself another drink. "Heard them in the bedroom. I don't even know who the asshole is." "So what are you going to do?" Leon asked, his voice calm, but with a steel hardness. Mason stared into his glass like he could make sense out of the amber liquid. "I don't know. You have a couple choices," Leon said. "Either leave her or find out the truth and decide." "The truth?" Mason looked up. "I already know the truth. She betrayed me. I mean the complete truth." "Who, when, and why?" Leon leaned closer. "If you want those answers, I can help you." Mason looked into his old friend's eyes. There was no pity in them, only professional calm and loyalty to his friend. "Help me." For the next 2 weeks, Mason maintained a superficial normalcy. He commuted to work on time, had limited conversations with Emma, and even accompanied her to a friend's party over the weekend. But inside he had entered a strange state of calm, like a bystander watching his life fall apart. The changes in Emma had actually been going on for months. Overtime had become more frequent. Weekend plans were always canceled. She had begun to be indifferent to household chores and shunned Mason's closeness. Mason had thought it was work stress or a natural low point in their marriage. Now he understood the truth. The day Leon handed Mason the results of the survey, it was a rainy day. They were sitting in Leon's car, the rain pounding on the roof like some kind of ominous drumbeat. "Nathan Reed." Leon handed Mason a stack of photographs, head of the city planning department, Emma's boss. The photos showed Emma and a tall man walking side by side into a restaurant, out of a hotel, hugging and kissing in a parking lot. Each one stuck like a knife into Mason's heart. "How long has this been going on?" Mason's voice was surprisingly calm. "At least 4 months, according to my research." Leon flipped to another page of the report. They usually met on Wednesdays and Fridays, sometimes for lunch, more often after work. The hotel was usually the Harrington downtown. Mason looked closely at the man in the photo. Nathan Reed, early 40s, well kept in shape, wearing a tailored suit and a confident smile. He was the type Mason had always been jealous of, powerful, with a wide social circle, and seemingly everything he wanted without having to work for it. "Is he married?" "Divorced for 3 years," Leon replied. "Ex-wife moved to the East Coast with the kids." Mason slipped the photo and the report into his briefcase and didn't speak immediately. Rain pelted the windshield, blurring the world outside. "One more thing," Leon hesitated. "There's been some problems with the urban renewal program that Nathan Reed is in charge of. I've detected some unusual movement of funds that may involve a transfer of benefits. Emma, as the project coordinator, is likely to be aware or involved." Mason looked up. "You mean corruption?" "I'm not sure of the exact nature, but there's definitely something fishy going on." Leon handed Mason a flash drive. This has all the information I could find. If you want to capitalize on that dash. Mason took the flash drive and held it tightly in his fingers as if it were a key that would unlock the door to vengeance. Thanks, Leon. What are you going to do? Mason looked out the window at the blur of rain. I don't know yet. But when I decide, they're going to regret it. That night, Emma came home later than usual. When she walked in the door, Mason was sitting at the dining room table with 2 glasses of wine and a barely touched dinner. Sorry, work emergency. Emma took off her jacket without even looking at Mason. You shouldn't have waited for me. Emergency. Mason took a sip of his wine, his voice calm. Handled with Nathan Reed? Emma's hand stopped in midair as she slowly turned around, the expression on her face changing from surprise to alarm. What are you talking about? Nathan Reed, your boss, your lover. Mason pushed his cell phone toward her, and on the screen was a picture of Emma and Nathan kissing in front of the hotel. Emma stared at the photo and didn't say anything immediately. Mason expected to see shame, remorse, even fear. But when Emma looked up, all he saw was indifference and a hint of annoyance. You followed me. Is that the point of your concern? Mason felt a surge of anger rise from his chest. I found out you were cheating on me, and your concern is how I found out. Emma pushed her phone back and walked towards the liquor cabinet to pour herself a glass of whiskey. She moved with grace and aplomb, as if they were discussing the weather and not her betrayal. I didn't want you to know in this way, she said finally, a strange calmness in her tone. But now that you know, I think we should talk. Talk about what? Talk about how you betrayed our marriage? Talk about how you slept with someone else in our bed. Mason's voice began to shake and he clenched his fists, trying to control his emotions. Talk about how our marriage is dead. Emma looked Mason straight in the eye. It's been dead for a long time, Mason. You just don't want to admit it. What do you mean? Look at us. Emma shook her head. We're just strangers living under the same roof. You do your job day in and day out. You come home and immerse yourself in your projects. When was the last time we had a real conversation? And when was the last time we had sex? So this is my fault. Because I worked hard to try to make a better life for us. Not really. Emma sighed. I'm to blame. But the truth is, the bond between us is gone. I feel alive with Nathan. I feel valued and needed. Mason stood up and walked over to Emma. There was less than a meter between them, but it was as if they were separated by an abyss. 6 years, Emma. We've been together for 6 years. We have commitments, responsibilities, and dash. Responsibilities? Emma laughed, a laugh that made Mason tingle. You think of marriage as a responsibility? That's the problem, Mason. To you, I'm just an item in your life, a responsibility to be maintained. And to Nathan? I think to him, you're just a convenient bedmate, a tool to get him internal support on his projects. Emma's eyes narrowed. You don't know him. I know people like him. Mason sneered. Power, status, money, always getting what he wants. Tell me, Emma, did he promise to spend the rest of his life with you? Or was it just talk in bed? Emma's face changed, and Mason knew he'd hit a sore spot. But she quickly regained her composure. I'm moving out, she announced, and we both need time to think. Think about what? Whether to keep cheating on me or how to divide our property. It's not cheating, Mason, it's a choice. I chose my happiness. Emma walked towards the bedroom. I'll come get my things tomorrow. Mason stood still and watched her back disappear at the end of the hallway. His anger suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a cold resolve. She had chosen her own happiness and didn't care how that choice destroyed his life. You're going to regret this, he said softly, knowing she could no longer hear him. You both will. The day Emma moved out, Mason made his move. He took a week off from work, telling the company he needed to take care of personal business. In reality, he was making plans. He started by studying the information Leon had provided about the urban renewal project. It was a multi-million-dollar project that involved remodeling older areas of the city. Nathan, as the director, had the ultimate authority to decide on contractors and allocate funds. Emma, as coordinator, was responsible for communicating with all parties and handling documentation. The information reveals that certain contracts have been awarded to unqualified companies. Funds have flowed into suspicious accounts, and the project is way behind schedule, yet reports show that everything is in order. What's more, several of these dubious companies were indirectly linked to Nathan, either owned by his friends or run by his former partners. Mason needed more evidence. He contacted Leon. I need to get into Emma's computer. Mason said over the phone. She may have saved files on the project. This could involve trespassing, Leon warns. And if it's discovered, dash. I know the risks, Mason interrupted, but it's my only chance. She's coming back tomorrow for more stuff, and I need it before then. Leon was silent for a moment, then sighed. I know someone who can help, but you have to understand that once you start, there's no turning back. There's been no turning back for me for a long time. The next day, Mason got a small device that could copy the contents of the hard drive by simply plugging it into a computer USB port for a few minutes. When Emma came to get her stuff, Mason offered to get coffee, giving him plenty of time. Later that night, Mason sat in his study, browsing through the files he'd acquired from Emma's computer. Most of them were day-to-day work documents, but in an encrypted folder, he found a series of private emails and memos. In the emails, Nathan and Emma discussed not only their relationship, but also how they handled certain sensitive issues in the project. One in particular caught Mason's attention. Nathan wrote, "Remember to amend the minutes to make sure no one can find out about the transfer. Thanks for your cooperation, honey. That's why I need you by my side. We'll go far together." Mason saved the files, making backups. He also found Emma's private diary, which detailed her relationship with Nathan, from the initial attraction to the gradual deepening. In the diary, Emma describes Mason as predictable and lacking ambition, while Nathan is charming and exciting. Reading these words is like rubbing salt in his heart, but Mason forces himself to continue. He needs to know his enemies. He needs to know their weaknesses. In the latest installments of her diary, Emma expresses her doubts about Nathan's commitment, her uncertainty about whether he really loves her. Clearly, the honeymoon period was over and reality was beginning to surface. Mason shut down his computer and stood in front of the window looking out over the city at night. His plan was beginning to take shape. Not only was he going to destroy Nathan's career and reputation, but he was going to make Emma realize what a bad choice she had made. 2 days later, Mason bumps into Nathan Reed at a coffee shop. Located near City Hall, the coffee shop is Nathan's go-to spot every morning. Nathan Reed. Mason approached Nathan as he waited for his coffee and held out his hand. "I'm Mason Hughes, Emma's husband." Nathan was visibly surprised, but quickly regained his composure. He hesitated, then shook Mason's hand. "Mr. Hughes, this is unexpected. Please call me Mason." Mason smiled, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I think we should talk." "I'm not sure there's anything to talk about." Nathan glanced at his watch. "And I have meetings, dash. It'll only take a few minutes." Mason's voice was quiet, but with a firmness that couldn't be denied. "About Emma, about your relationship, about the urban renewal program." Nathan's expression changed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Is that a threat?" "It's just a conversation." Mason picked up his coffee and gestured to the door. "We can talk as we walk." They walked out of the coffee shop and moved down the street toward City Hall. Nathan maintained a guarded silence. "I know about you and Emma," Mason said as he got right to the point. "I'm also aware of one of the project's unregulated operations." "I don't know what you're talking about." Nathan's voice was cold and hard. "If you're here to threaten me, dash." "Not a threat," Mason interrupted. "A reminder. Do you think Emma truly loves you? Or is she just attracted to your position and power?" "It's none of your business." "Maybe," Mason shrugged. "But have you ever thought that if you lost all of that, status, power, reputation, would she still choose you?" Nathan stopped and turned to Mason. "Look, I understand how you feel. But this is an adult decision. Emma chose me, and we dash. You guys what? We'll live happily ever after." Mason laughed. "After you're investigated for corruption? After Emma is indicted for assisting you?" Nathan's face turned pale. "You're full of shit." "I have proof, Nathan. Emails, memos, meeting minutes, money flow. Enough for the DA to bring charges against you." "You're bluffing." Mason pulled a flash drive from his pocket and waved it in front of Nathan. "Want to test it? I could send these to the press right now, or the DA, or the mayor." Nathan stared at the flash drive, the knot in his throat rolling up and down. "What do you want?" "Nothing," Mason said as he put the flash drive back in his pocket. "Just want you to know that when you take something from someone else, you might lose more. Think about it, Nathan." Mason turned and walked away, leaving Nathan standing on the sidewalk, grimacing. This is just the beginning, Mason thought. The war had already been fought. Over the next few weeks, Mason executed his plan with surprising calm and precision. During the day, he worked his regular job, and at night, he analyzed the data, contacting journalists who might be interested in the corruption of the program, anonymously providing clues and partial evidence. He began to follow Nathan on social media, noticing that he and Emma began to appear together publicly, as if to declare their relationship. Emma contacted Mason several times to discuss the divorce. Each call was brief and formal. She presented a preliminary plan for property division, and Mason said he needed time to think about it. His calm and cooperative demeanor seemed to confuse Emma. Perhaps she was expecting bickering and pestering, not this near indifference. "Are you okay?" Emma asked suddenly at the end of a call, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Never better," Mason replied, his tone calm. "I realize you're right, Emma. Our marriage did die a long time ago. Now I can focus on a new beginning." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. That's good. I'm glad you see it that way." "Yes, it's better to end than to delay." Mason paused. "By the way, I hear Nathan's project is going well?" "Yes, everything is going well." Emma's voice was a little hesitant. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. After all, your future is now closely tied to his." Mason's voice held a hint of something she couldn't decipher. "Good luck, Emma." After hanging up, Mason turned on his computer to check on the latest developments. The tip he had given anonymously had caught the attention of the local media. An independent news site had published an investigative article questioning the transparency of the city's redevelopment program and the reasonableness of certain contracting decisions. It didn't directly name Nathan or Emma, but it was already causing consternation within City Hall. Mason knows that large corruption cases usually require an insider's testimony to really break through. He needed to find someone willing to come forward. After weeks of investigation, he zeroed in on a target: Derek Miller, a clerk in the finance department responsible for auditing program expenditures. Derek had recently been demoted, allegedly for poor performance. But Mason suspected that the truth might be that he had refused to cooperate with some of the misconduct. Through Leon's connections, Mason arranges a meeting with Derek. In a quiet restaurant booth, Derek's face went from wary to angry after hearing Mason's statement. "I knew something was wrong," Derek whispered. "Those numbers never matched up. Every time I questioned it, Nathan would say he'd fixed it, or that it was a normal budget adjustment. When I insisted on a more detailed explanation, I was suddenly transferred to the file room." "Do you have proof?" Mason asked. "Any documentation to back up what you're saying?" Derek hesitated. "I kept copies of some of the documents. Not sure they're enough, but they definitely indicate an anomaly. Would you be willing to share those with the prosecutor?" Derek looked out the window, thinking. "I have a family, a mortgage. If I lose my job, I understand," Mason nodded. "But think about what happens if these corrupt practices continue. Taxpayers' money is wasted, and neighborhoods that really need help don't get improved. And those who prevent you from telling the truth are using the system to enrich themselves." Derek was silent for a moment, then made up his mind. "Okay, I'll do it. But I need some assurances." "Sure." Mason pulled out a business card. "Here's a reporter I know who specializes in government corruption cases and understands how to protect sources. Contact her, and she'll help you arrange for an anonymous deposition." A week later, the front page of the major local newspaper carried an explosive story: massive corruption alleged in urban renewal project. The article detailed the misuse of funds, contract maneuvering, and conflicts of interest in the project, citing testimony from several anonymous insiders, the most critical of which was the financial data provided by Derek. While the article did not directly name Nathan or Emma, it clearly identified project managers and key coordinators as allegedly involved. The mayor's office immediately announced the formation of an investigative committee, suspended the project, and suspended those involved for investigation. Nathan and Emma suddenly found themselves at the center of the storm. Later that night, Emma called Mason, her voice trembling. "Did you know about this?" "That story. I saw it," Mason replied calmly. "It looks like a serious situation. It's a disaster." Emma was practically sobbing. "They suspended me and said they're going to investigate my involvement. Mason, I could be facing criminal charges." Mason felt a flicker of mixed emotions, satisfaction, but also a hint of pity, which he then forced down. What about Nathan? What's he doing? He said he'd take care of it, said I just needed to stick to his story and everything would be fine. There was uncertainty in Emma's voice, but he sounded scared too. Do you believe him? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I don't know, Emma finally admitted. I really don't know anymore. Mason gripped the phone tightly, feeling that the first stage of the plan was complete. Emma was beginning to question her choices, beginning to feel the cost of betrayal. But it wasn't enough. Can I help? Mason asked, feigned concern in his voice. You'd like to help me? Emma sounded incredulous. No matter what happens, we were once a couple, Emma. Mason said, a calculated gentleness in his tone. I'm not going to let you face this alone. After hanging up, Mason turned on his computer and sent Leon a message. Phase 2 begins. The investigation swept through the city planning department like a storm. Nathan Reed was officially suspended and investigated, and Emma was questioned multiple times as a key coordinator. The media begins digging into Nathan's past and discovers that this isn't the first time he's been involved in a controversial project. Mason continues his plan to gather more evidence and contact more people in the know. His goal is not only to make sure Nathan and Emma pay for their betrayal, but also to get the truth out. Emma contacts Mason almost daily for advice or just to pour out her fears. Mason comes across as supportive and understanding, but each conversation subtly plants seeds of doubt that make Emma question Nathan's motives and sincerity. He told me today that if the situation worsens, I should say that I made all the decisions unilaterally, Emma says in a shaky phone call. He said that way he can protect me because I'm a first-time offender and will probably just get probation. Sounds like he's preparing you to be a scapegoat, Mason commented, his tone calm, but with a hint of concern. Are you sure he's protecting you and not himself? He wouldn't do that to me, Emma insisted, but there was a lack of confidence in her voice. He loves me. Love is proven by actions, Emma, not words. Mason deliberately quoted what she had once told him. When push comes to shove, people show their true colors. A few days later, Emma realized that Nathan had begun to distance himself from her. He stopped answering her calls, dates were canceled, and when they did occasionally meet, he seemed distracted and wary. He's avoiding me, Emma cries from Mason's apartment. Since things blew up, she'd moved out of the apartment she shared with Nathan and was temporarily staying at a friend's house. But today she'd come to Mason for help. He says it's to protect us both, but it feels like he's just protecting himself. Mason handed her a cup of tea and sat down on the couch across from her. Maybe he's just backing down in the face of pressure. Not everyone can stay firm in a crisis. Emma raised teary eyes to look at him. Why are you being so nice? After what I did to you? Mason smiled slightly with mixed emotions in his eyes. Maybe it's because I remember what we once had. Maybe it's because, no matter what happens, I want to see justice. The hidden meaning in that statement disturbed Emma, but she didn't look deeper. That night, Mason contacted an assistant prosecutor he knew for an update on the case. The investigation is deepening, the assistant told him. But Nathan Reed has a good network of connections, and there may be attempts to protect him. Unless there is direct evidence that he knew about and approved the violations, he may get off with mismanagement. What if someone is willing to testify that he was directly involved? Mason asked. That would change the situation. But who would do that? Everyone directly involved would be implicated. Mason remembered the emails and memos on Emma's computer. What if there was documentary evidence? Documents that clearly showed he had knowledge and directed these actions. That would be key evidence. But you have to make sure it was legally obtained or it won't be admissible in court. Mason hung up the phone and began to think about his next step. He needed a legal way to use that evidence. Submitting the files he had obtained from Emma's computer directly was out of the question. That would constitute trespassing. But if those files could be found through other channels? The next day, Mason made an appointment to see Emma. They met in a quiet cafe, and Mason chose a corner seat to make sure the conversation wouldn't be overheard. I've been thinking about how I can help you, Mason said as he got right to the point. I know some people who might be able to give you legal advice. But first, I need to know exactly where you are. Emma looked exhausted and had deep dark circles under her eyes. The situation is worse than I thought. The prosecutor's office is already preparing charging documents. I could be facing fraud and embezzlement charges. What about Nathan? He hired a great lawyer. Emma smiled bitterly. and apparently he has the resources to deal with the situation. And I can't even afford a good lawyer. Mason pretended to think. Would things be better if you could prove that you were just following instructions and not the mastermind? Maybe, but that would mean I'd have to testify against Nathan. Emma looked pained. I don't know if I can dash. Emma, Mason looked her straight in the eye. If the situation was reversed, do you think Nathan would protect you? Based on his recent behavior, do you really believe he would sacrifice himself for you? Emma lowered her head and was silent for a long moment. No, she finally whispered. I don't believe that. Then you need to protect yourself. Mason leaned forward. Do you have any evidence that Nathan knew about and directed these behaviors? Emails, texts, memos. Emma thought for a moment. Then her eyes lit up. There were some emails. He instructed me to change minutes and hide certain transactions. There were also memos, written by him personally, about how to handle those special contracts. These are on your work computer? No, most of it is on my private email and laptop. We were both careful not to leave traces on the company system. Mason nodded, pretending this was new information. These could be your umbrella, Emma. If you're willing to cooperate with the investigation and provide this evidence, the DA may consider reducing the charges against you. But that would mean betraying Nathan. Emma hesitated. Even though he may be ready to sacrifice me. It's not betrayal, Mason said gently. It's choosing the truth. Choosing what's right. Maybe this is your chance to make up for past mistakes. Emma looked at Mason with conflicting emotions in her eyes. Why did you help me? After I betrayed you. Mason gave an almost sincere smile. Maybe because, no matter what happens, I want justice to be done. Emma seemed to accept this explanation. She agrees to consider Mason's suggestion and promises an answer the next day. Mason left the cafe feeling that the plan was unfolding perfectly. Emma was about to volunteer that crucial evidence and Nathan's fate would be decided once and for all. The next day, Emma called with determination in her voice. I've decided. I'm going to cooperate with the investigation. I can't let Nathan use me as a scapegoat. I'll contact the DA today. You made the right decision, Mason encouraged her. Do you need me to go with you? No, this is something I have to face alone. Emma paused. Mason, thank you. Even after I hurt you like that, you were still willing to help me. You're welcome, Mason replied calmly. Everyone should be responsible for their own choices. Those words silenced Emma. 3 days later, Nathan Reed was formally arrested on charges including embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction of justice. News reports claimed that a key insider provided the decisive evidence that Nathan was directly involved in and directed the violations in the urban renewal project. While the identity of the insider was not revealed, Mason knew it was Emma. The case drew citywide attention. More information about Nathan's wrongdoing is unearthed, not limited to the current project, but also other government projects he's worked on in the past. His carefully constructed professional image and network of contacts begin to crumble. Meanwhile, Emma reaches a plea deal with the prosecutor as a tainted witness. She admits to participating in some of the offenses, but because she provided key evidence and cooperated with the investigation, her sentence is significantly reduced, and she may only be subject to probation and community service. However, her career and reputation have been hit just as hard. Mason observed it all and felt a complicated sense of satisfaction. His plan had worked, but the taste of victory wasn't as sweet as he'd imagined. One evening, Emma arrives at Mason's apartment again. She looked even more haggard than the last time they met, but there was a new clarity in her eyes. The prosecutor said the case will be closed soon, she told Mason, and Nathan could be facing at least 10 years in prison. His lawyers are pushing for a plea deal, but it's unlikely the prosecutor will agree. What about you? Mason asked. 300 hours of community service, 5 years probation, and permanent disqualification from working in the public sector. Emma smiled bitterly. That's pretty lenient considering what I've done. Mason nodded and handed Emma a glass of wine. You did the right thing, Emma. You chose the truth. Yes, but it's too late. Emma took the glass but didn't drink. You know, I'm beginning to see what a mistake I made. Not just participating in those offenses, but our marriage. Mason didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. I thought Nathan was everything I wanted: successful, charming, exciting. But when the crisis hit, he was immediately ready to sacrifice me to save himself. Emma lifted her head and looked Mason straight in the eye. And you, even after I betrayed you, stood by me and helped me. Mason felt a wave of mixed emotions. He hadn't helped Emma out of the goodness of his heart, but to ensure that his plan for revenge would succeed. However, seeing her vulnerability and remorse at this moment, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of turmoil. I've been thinking, Emma continued. Maybe we could, I don't know, start over? Not right away, but maybe someday, when the dust settles. Mason took a deep breath, knowing he had to keep his wits about him. Emma sought not a true reconciliation, but a safe harbor, a refuge after she'd lost everything. Emma, Mason said gently but firmly, we can't start over. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Emma's eyes glistened with tears. I know I made mistakes, Mason. I've hurt you, betrayed you. But can't people change? Can't one be given a second chance? Of course people can change, Mason nodded. But some decisions have permanent consequences. When you chose to leave me, when you chose to betray our marriage, it wasn't just a moment of weakness or mistake. It was a decision that reflected your values and priorities. But I realize my mistake now. The question isn't whether you recognize the mistake, Emma. Mason interrupted her. But whether I can still trust you. The answer is no. I no longer trust you, and I no longer love you. Emma looked like she'd been slapped. She put her glass down, her hand shaking slightly. Are you telling me you helped me just for what? To see me fail? Mason didn't answer directly. I helped you because I believe the truth should come out, that justice should be served. Nathan should pay for his actions, and so should you. So all of this, it's all about revenge? Emma's voice became sharp. Not all of it. Mason looked her straight in the eye. It's also about consequences and choices. You chose to betray, you chose to cheat, you chose to break the law. Now you're facing the natural consequences of those choices. Emma stood up, tears already streaming from her eyes. You planned all of this, didn't you? From the very beginning. You deliberately led me to give that evidence, deliberately made me betray Nathan as I betrayed you. Mason didn't deny it. I simply created the opportunity for the truth to surface. You and Nathan made your choices, and now you face the consequences. A range of emotions flashed across Emma's face. Anger, betrayal, fear, and finally resignation. I didn't know you had this side to you, Mason. Neither did I until you betrayed me. Mason replied calmly. Emma picked up her bag and headed for the door. Before she left, she turned to give Mason one last look. You did it, Mason. You completely destroyed me. I hope this gives you the satisfaction you were looking for. After the door closed, Mason sat in the darkness, contemplating how this revenge had made him feel. He did get some sort of satisfaction, seeing those who betrayed him pay. But the taste of victory was more complex than he'd imagined, laced with emptiness and doubt. 2 weeks later, Nathan Reed's case was officially closed. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 12 years in prison, fined $500,000, and permanently barred from public office. The media covered the whole affair, describing it as one of the worst cases of local government corruption in recent years. Emma's name also appeared in the story, and although she received a lesser punishment as a tainted witness, her professional career and social reputation have been completely destroyed. She had to move out of the city and start a new life. Mason reads the reports with mixed emotions. He had succeeded, but the victory did not fill the hole left by the betrayal. The satisfaction of revenge is short-lived, while the memory of the hurt lingers. Leon arrived at Mason's apartment one night with a bottle of whiskey. To celebrate your victory, Leon said, pouring 2 glasses. The enemy has been defeated and justice served. Mason took the glass, but didn't drink immediately. Is that really a victory? You got what you wanted, didn't you? Nathan in prison, Emma's life destroyed, the truth out. Yes, but I still lost my marriage and the man I once loved. Mason stared at the amber liquid in his glass. Sometimes I wonder if this revenge is worth it. Leon was silent for a moment, then said, Revenge was never about making you feel better, Mason. It was about making those who hurt you understand that actions have consequences. And do you think they understand that? I think so. Leon raised his glass, to truth and to consequences. Mason hesitated, then raised his glass to clink. To choices. A year later, Mason left that city and accepted a job offer from another company on the West Coast. He needed a fresh start, a place free of painful memories. Before he left, he received a letter from Emma. In the letter, she tells Mason that she is now working in a small town, doing a regular office job. She has accepted her mistakes and the consequences and is trying to rebuild her life. At the end of the letter, she writes, "I don't ask for your forgiveness because I know that some betrayals can't be forgiven. But I want you to know that I have come to understand my mistake. You once said that everyone should take responsibility for their choices, and you were right. I take responsibility for my choices every day now, and this may be the only amends I can make." Mason put the letter in his suitcase without replying. Some endings don't need more words, and some lessons are already deeply understood. On the plane to his new home, Mason looked out the window at the clouds, a glass of whipped cream in his hand. He thought back to that night a year ago when his world had collapsed when he discovered Emma's betrayal. Now he had rebuilt himself, and although the scars remained, he had learned to live with them. The plane began its descent, the west coast sunlight pouring through the clouds into the cabin. Mason closed his eyes and prepared for a new life. Revenge had been accomplished and justice had been served. Those who had chosen to betray had paid for their actions. And he, Mason Hughes, had chosen to move forward. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.